Hi, everybody. Do let me know if you can hear me. Send a little message in the chat so that I know that everything is working well. Lovely to see you all, and thank you for coming to our final workshop for the hack. Of course, although this is the final workshop, I hope it's not the last time that I will be hearing from all of you. I am here for one-to-one calls, and all of our partners that are working with us for this hack are available in the Discord channel for technical questions. I'm just letting kind of people slowly file in, and then I will invite our speaker to the stage, which is Jonathan from Talisman, to tell us about front-end development basics and back-end authentication for Polkadot. So hopefully this will be a great talk for everybody to really get the basics down. And he will guide you through some code today. So I hope you're all looking forward to that. Please do put any questions into the questions tab so that we can see them at the end. Jonathan has left some time for questions. And if there is anything you want to ask me, please go ahead and put that in the chat or send me a DM on Discord afterwards. I am just going to invite Jonathan onto the stage now. And he will take over from me.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet everyone. I will share my screen and we'll get cracking. Well, nice to meet everyone. It looks like cam's off, but I'm sure you're hiding there somewhere. I'm Jonathan. I'm one of the co-founders of Talisman. For those that don't know, we'll be running through a few things today. Firstly, some really basic kind of front-end tips and tricks for building a Substrate application. So this is things like which packages are relevant, how to connect the suite of wallets that are available in the ecosystem, submitting transactions, connecting to nodes, that kind of a thing. I'll also introduce something that we built kind of in-house at Talisman for our own needs a couple of months ago. But that's kind of a generic common good for the ecosystem that you guys might find useful for kind of various different hackathon ideas, because it's quite a generic thing, and that's kind of authenticating your Substrate account against the backend for whatever purposes you may deem relevant. And we've called that sign in with Substrate. If you're familiar with sign in with Ethereum or SIWS, then it's like a Substrate equivalent to that. And we've got some Q&A and free time at the end because I'm not sure this will cover the full hour, but hopefully that's useful. So for those that don't know about Talisman, we've been around in Polkadot since pretty much the start of 2022. We like to think of ourselves as like this product-oriented team that's building an application layer in the ecosystem. And we've done this via two products. Firstly, like a wallet extension that I hope a lot of you have installed and use as your daily driver for Polkadot and its parachains. And that's got a bunch of users and supports all of the networks that you can imagine. And we also have a web portal that surfaces some of the other opportunities inside of the ecosystem, like staking and transferring your tokens between chains, looking at all of your NFTs and things like that. So that's kind of the role we play in the ecosystem. As kind of a user-facing kind of team of product builders. But we also do a lot of this kind of developer advocacy, helping folks also build in this like browser or application layer that we play in. I think a lot of folks in the ecosystem are kind of more focused on the runtime side of things. And I don't know if you guys are going to be doing the same for your hackathon. But there aren't as many folks like us that kind of a TypeScript monkeys. Most people seem to be running around writing Rust, and we're one of a few teams writing TypeScript. So that's Talisman. That's what we're going to run through today. And first of all, let's just do some run through a really basic dApp that I whipped up earlier today to cover the basics you're going to need for developing against your Substrate chain that you might be building for your hackathon submission. So this is the really sophisticated dApp I've put together. It does two things. It firstly connects your Substrate wallet And secondly, I've connected this to the West End testnet, and it'll burn some amount of West End tokens by sending it to the treasury. So very simply, you can connect a wallet that's installed. Obviously, I have Talisman installed, and specify an address. I'm going to specify an address that has some West Ends in them. And then I've retrieved my account public key in the West End format here, and then surfaced some transaction. Oh, I can zoom in. Is that better? Cool, thanks. So connect to a wallet, retrieve the address, and then burn some amount of West End tokens. And this should try to submit a transaction via Talisman. You can see here that it's a transfer keep alive on the balances palette, and we're burning, well, we're not burning per se, but a common notion is to kind of burn your tokens by sending it to a system address, either like a 0 address or the treasury. In this case, this is the 0 address, I think, for West End. And then if I wanted to burn that amount of tokens, which I don't want to do, I would then approve this transaction. So how do you do this in Substrate? It should be pretty simple to kind of follow along on the different bits of documentation that are available in the ecosystem. But what's not so easy is that kind of finding the right tools for the job, because there's a kind of a range of SDKs and libraries that you might kind of come across in your quest to build a simple front end for your Substrate application. So the aim of this workshop today is to kind of direct you to in the right direction so that you're not spending so much time on that simple stuff. So here's the code for the application. As I told you, it's kind of devilishly simple. We're talking 100 lines max, and this can probably be code golfed down to something much more smaller. But we can kind of ignore all of this for now. We've just got some generic headers and kind of validation on whether extensions are connected or not, what to show, things like that. What we're really interested in are the two kind of functions I've got up here and the packages that I've imported here to connect your wallet and to propagate the transaction. I'll zoom in again. How's this? All good? All right. So the first thing which you'll want to do when you're building a front end for a Substrate application is install two dependencies from the Polkadot NPM organization. Firstly is this extension DApp repository or extension DApp library. This exposes like 7 or 8 functions, and it's all for the purpose of interacting with extensions designed for Substrate that are injecting their accounts into the browser. So Talisman, Polkadot.js, Subwallet, all of these browser extensions that exist within the Polkadot ecosystem will kind of inject their information into a window object in the browser called injected web3, just like the string. And this set of functions is just like a set of helper functions to allow you to communicate with that injected object and communicate with, in this case, Talisman. And then the other dependency you guys will want to be pretty aware of inside of the Polkadot ecosystem is just the Polkadot API. This is something that's been around since day dot. It's built by a guy that used to work for Parity called Yako, and it will kind of handle a lot of the state queries, RPC calls, extrinsic construction, and extrinsic submission you'll need for all of the Substrate chains that exist now. And if you're developing your own Substrate chain, you can kind of provide a set of options when you initialize the API for your specific functionality on your DApp. And it looks like somebody's found the repo that I'm showing here. So that's good. You're right. That is the correct repository. If I've committed to it in the past 30 minutes, then that's definitely the correct one. So the first thing you want to do is to kind of announce to the Substrate extensions that are injected into the window that, hey, I'm a Substrate dApp. I want to retrieve more information from the extension. As in, I want to kind of ask permission to see the list of accounts that the user has selected to inject into the website. You do this via the Web3 enable function. All you have to do is just kind of await this call and provide the name of your dApp to the extension. And Talisman in the browser will kind of see this message, and it'll say to the user, the Encode Hackathon dApp wants to connect and see some information about your accounts. This is the URL, this is the name of the dApp. Which accounts would you like to connect? Some of them, all of them, none of them. And if the user has kind of allowed you, or allowed the dApp by approving the request, then we can kind of populate the list of accounts that the user has injected into the Web3 object with this simple Web3 accounts call. And I've just set that to some state here. So at this point, I've already authorized it, but at this point we have asked Talisman for permission to see what accounts are injected, ask the user to inject them, that happens in the extension, and then we've kind of retrieved the address of the one account that I decided to connect, which is my West End account here. So at this point in your Substrate application, you'll be able to kind of pre-populate anything else that the user might want to see. So if you're running a data indexer and you want to pull the information that is relevant for the user's account, you can kind of take the address that the user has injected, make a query. If you want to do some RPC calls or state calls in a similar way, all the same stuff. This happens now with the address that has been injected onto the injected Web3 object. And at some point, I assume you'll want your dApp to submit a transaction or propagate a transaction to the chain. And this is where the Polkadot API becomes a bit more useful, or this is where you can lean on the Polkadot API. The first thing you're going to need to do is instantiate a WebSocket provider. I'm using the West End kind of public node that's available for development here. I've just got the WebSocket address. But if you're using a different chain, you can find, where is it? You can find a list of different endpoints. Talisman maintains this kind of chain data repository where we have a list of all of the different public endpoints that are available inside of the ecosystem. So if you're looking to develop against, let's say, the Avail testnet, then you can find different endpoints there to use, and that's totally fine. Or if you're running a Substrate locally and you're kind of running your node on your machine, then it will probably be surfaced at this IP address. Obviously, it's localhost and the 9944 port, and you can kind of instantiate your WebSocket connection with the node that's running locally on your machine if you want to. I wanted to do it today, but Substrate takes too long to build, so we didn't get enough time. So I'm West End for now. Once you've got your WebSocket opened and the WebSocket provider instantiated, you can just pass that in to create this kind of API promise object. And that API object has all of the metadata and kind of type registry information for the Substrate chain that you've initialized in your WebSocket provider. So if you need some metadata to do with some kind of specific functionality that you've made on your Substrate chain, you can pass that metadata in as an option when you create this API object. And that kind of syntax is defined in the Polkadot.js API documentation, and we can take a look at that later if you guys have a question. To instantiate the transaction, you're going to need not just the address of the account that the user wants to submit from, but also the object that's injected, because on that object is a bunch of methods, one of which is something called sign and send, which kind of asks the extension to sign the transaction for that particular account. So we just grab the injected objects by using the Web3 from address function, which is in the extension dApp library. And then when we have that injector, we can kind of keep that in the back pocket for use, because the first thing, because after that, we've just got to craft our transaction. This is a very simple balances transfer, so it's just like a transfer keep alive. And then once you've got that kind of transaction, this is just call data. You can kind of call a method on that call data, sign and send, and then you pass in your signer. And on this signer object is the kind of the message passing that Talisman extension will listen for when we want to apply a signature to the transaction. This will return a promise, and you can kind of track the completion of your transaction by looking at the status that's returned. There's a couple of different attributes on this status. I'm not sure if I can see them here by looking at the type definition. Yeah, here we go. So there's a bunch of different objects that are available. We were using is in block previously. That will kind of flag pretty quickly, so we can quickly determine whether or not the transaction has been included in a block. But there's a lot of other things you can watch out for. Another useful thing that we lean on a lot in Talisman is finalized attribute. This is essentially saying, is the transaction like a number of blocks deep, such that we can kind of, with a almost 100% degree of certainty, say that this transaction is going to kind of form a part of the chain state, and it's not going to kind of be in a different block than we first thought. So that's just waiting until the block's really, really deep, and you can use that as like a final confirmation. But for this test app, I just used it as in block because that's kind of a quicker confirmation, as that will kind of hit pretty quickly. If it's like a 6-second block time, you should get that status coming through pretty quickly. You can check out the block that it was completed in as well by using the API object, and that is that for the most simple Substrate application you'll ever see. Connect a wallet, get the address, get the injected object, and then propagate a transaction using the node that we connected to here. A couple of caveats before I head into some kind of tips and tricks and then the backend verification stuff. The Polkadot.js API will not allow the extension to modify the call data of the transaction as it signs it. So us in Talisman, we can only apply a signature to the call data and give it back to the dApp, and then the dApp kind of propagates it to the chain via that node that we supplied above. So if you're expecting the dApp, if as the dApp, you're expecting the wallet to do work to say, what's the kind of gas requirements on the chain, and do I need to apply a tip to this transaction to kind of bump it in the priority queue so that it gets mined quickly, Talisman won't be able to do that, because that's kind of seen as modifying the call data of the transaction. And Polkadot.js API is quite safe in the sense that it won't allow the extension to modify the call data. So one thing you might want to watch out for is just look at how busy the chain is. And if you think the user is going to require a tip to get the transaction through quickly, you have to add that as you can construct the transaction here before you send it for Talisman signing here. That's a small caveat. I don't think it's super common to see that. I think only a handful of times we've kind of had users bump into a problem where their transaction needs a tip. Most of the time you should be able to ignore that, but that is something to watch out for. There are a few other tips and tricks that I want to cover on this topic. Firstly, you don't have to use the Polkadot.js API that I demoed earlier to craft your transaction all of the time. There's actually a really useful package called the TX wrapper Polkadot that can craft a number of different transactions offline. So you don't have to instantiate a WebSocket connection. and then kind of download the type registry, which Polkadot.js does in the background in order to craft a transaction. This has all of the type registry and metadata locally for a kind of some number of transactions. And what you can do is you can craft the cool data before any kind of API has been any kind of API or WebSocket connection has been initialized, and then send that to the node kind of at any point later. And this means that you can kind of front load a lot of the effort. You don't need to rely on the Polkadot.js API, and you can have your cool data generated maybe offline if you want. And this is something that Talisman used for quite a long time inside of the extension, just because the Polkadot API is pretty heavy when it's downloading that cool data, or sorry, downloading the type registry. I mentioned the second point before a little bit earlier in the context of getting different endpoints and RPC nodes for all of the networks within Polkadot and Substrate. But that chain data repository also has a lot of other common metadata that you might want when you're interacting with Substrate chains. So it's got different token standards and token symbols, all of the assets, like visual assets that you would want to display for tokens and chains. It's got the RPCs, obviously, the account types that exist on different Substrate chains is there. Any CoinGecko IDs, like all of this useful stuff that you might kind of want to define in your Substrate application is in that Talisman chain data repository. I can send the TX wrapper Polkadot link in the chat when we're done. And to answer R3's question, the difference in TX wrapper Polkadot versus TX wrapper ORML is they just contain different extrinsics to construct. So all this TX wrapper is like the type registry for like a specific number of extrinsics that are kind of supported specifically for offline kind of cool data construction. So instead of having to get the type registry, which is huge, it's like some number of megabytes, which contains the typing for every single extrinsic possible on the Substrate chain. TX wrapper Polkadot, it just says, here's like some really common extrinsics. We're talking balances, transfers, maybe like some governance extrinsics. Let's just have a very small type registry for those, and we can rely on that to construct some valid cool data for submission later on in the application. So it's like a way around using this kind of big, ugly API object. So the difference between Polkadot TX wrapper and ORML TX wrapper is Polkadot contains like some extrinsics that are like balances, transfers, and some other common Substrate utilities, and they've lumped it under this package called Polkadot. And the ORML TX wrapper is for the ORML palette suite. So ORML was built by the Akala team. I don't know what it stands for. It's like something like Open Resource Module Library, or like some kind of weird acronym like that. But it's a set of palettes that a lot of Substrate chains rely on for defining fungible tokens. So you'll see in a lot of cases that a Substrate chain will have like a native token, which can be transferred using extrinsics available in TX wrapper Polkadot. But they also have a bunch of non-native tokens because they're doing like some DeFi protocol or something, and all of the tokens that are listed in that DeFi protocol need to be defined on a palette somewhere. And often they'll use the ORML tokens palette. So if you're kind of dealing with some of those tokens that are defined in that palette, then the TX wrapper ORML library should have some relevant extrinsics for you guys to craft if you want to go down that route. Another tip or trick to watch out for when you're developing your front end, and this is more of like a UX / like user transparency tip, is to always watch out for the existential deposit. This is some amount of assets on the native balances palette that the user must have in their account to kind of maintain its status as an account on the chain. If the user dips below that amount, it's reaped. You can check out the documentation, but essentially that kind of storage item is wiped from the chain, and the user is going to run into a lot of problems trying to submit transactions without topping up that account again. So in a lot of the Talisman products, we kind of hide this away from the user by basically not allowing them to transfer their existential deposit from their account, and kind of hiding or throwing a lot of warnings in the user space if they are going to submit a transaction that does dip their free balance below the existential deposit and reaping their account. It's like one dot on the Polkadot relay chain and some small fraction of KSM on Kusama, and different parachains of different existential deposits. All of that information should be in chain data for you guys to query. But yeah, watch out for that. And if you're building something that you want to have a certain level of polish for your users, I would recommend kind of engineering around that and making it transparent to your users that balance has to be reserved, or like has to be counted in a different column for the user, so that it's not something that they can use in whatever they're doing. Similarly, another kind of quirk of Substrate is that a lot of the different chains that are in the ecosystem will format the address in a different way. So you'll have one account inside of Talisman, it has one public key, it has one private key, but it has many different addresses, because different Substrate chains will say, I want to format the public key into an address that begins with a 5, or I want to format the public key into an address that begins with a W. I think the GM chain on Kusama chose to format addresses so that every single public address started with the letters GM. This can be pretty confusing for a user. We run into this a lot inside of Talisman, so we've got a nice little UI for copying your different addresses. But yeah, when you're building your front end, I would kind of make it clear what the address format is for that chain, but also just use the address or the account name property that comes by the Talisman extension. So I connected an account earlier called WND bags, and that's available on the injected Web3 object for you to kind of render in your application in place of the address. Another thing to watch out for is the PAPI project. This is under development at the moment at this GitHub link that I've listed here. But this is essentially like the successor to the Polkadot JS API that we used to construct our transaction earlier. It's not yet released and it's not yet final, but at some point in the year, there will be like a beta release of this API library. And I think a lot of the dApps inside of the ecosystem are going to have to migrate from Polkadot JS API into the Polkadot API, which sounds very similar, but it's a totally different package, kind of built in a different way. So if you are kind of having like a long-term time horizon on your hackathon project, I would build it in a way where you can swap out the Polkadot API for PAPI at some point in 2024. Something else to watch out for is the different metadata versions that exist on Substrate chains. Substrate is up to metadata v15, which is just like kind of a way of packaging up a lot of the like chain metadata, but also extrinsic kind of function signatures, let's say. But not every Substrate chain is up to date. And depending on which chain you're interacting with, you'll either be using metadata v14 or v15. So if you're building a chain, make sure you do v15, because that's going to be the standard in the future and kind of is the standard now. But if you're using other parachains, be sure to check which metadata version they're using, and you'll have to kind of adjust the libraries that you've got in your front end accordingly if they're on v14. Lastly, if you want to kind of index and kind of massage some data into a different schema and have it on some middleware ahead of rendering it in your application, then there are some great data indexing projects in the ecosystem. I hope you guys have heard of them already, but SubSquid and SubQuery are two really great teams that will allow you to write a processor where you can define a schema for your data, the events or transactions or state that you want to index, and it will kind of throw it into like a Postgres database or whatever storage solution you've defined for you to query at a different endpoint. But yeah, I hope that's known already, because those are great projects, and I can see there's support for Pappy in the chat, which is really great to see. I hope more projects migrate or use Pappy here. R3 is asking, what's the best way to read events? I understand the graph method mostly for write events. Do you mean like polling chain state? So for polling balances and so on, you can use the Polkadot.js API. If you look at the Polkadot.js API documentation, if I zoom in here, there's a lot of, there's a good like cookbook on where is it? On the different state queries. Hang on, where is it? There's a list of the different RPC queries and state queries that you can find that's kind of typed inside of the Polkadot.js API here. Not sure where it is. But yeah, there's a list of, so you can use the Polkadot.js API to query balances and things like that via either a state query, and you can see they've got a snippet here for getting the nonce and a balance of an account. You can also do it via the JSON RPC with the API.rpc object. But you can also kind of do this locally, or kind of do it in your own way. By using a state call. So I would lean on the Polkadot.js API where I can. I'll find the proper documentation that I was trying to find then, and we can send it through at the end of the call. But yeah, you can get balances and most bits of kind of common chain state using the Polkadot.js API. If you're using ethers, that's probably because your chain implements the EVM. And in that case, I would look at using the VM. If you're using an EVM chain, I would check out the VM project. So this is like ethers, but better in my mind, or in my opinion. We use this within the Talisman extension. And if you're finding that ethers.js is pretty slow, yeah, I recommend checking out VM. It's really, really great. Yeah, WACME is awesome too. We use both of those inside of the Talisman extension. Okay. Any other questions on this before I move on to backend authentication and sign in with Substrate? If I build my own custom chain using Substrate, can I use TX wrapper, Pappy, etc.? You can use TX wrapper. You can take the TX wrapper core library that somebody shared above and kind of implement your own, let's call them adapters for the like specific runtime that you've implemented on your Substrate chain. But that's maybe a little bit cumbersome. You could just kind of use Subshape directly to encode and decode information from your chain. So Substrate is a tool that we've used at Talisman for encoding and decoding state calls to and from chains. So if you're using a Substrate, if you're using a custom chain that might not be supported in TIGS wrapper or the Polkadot JS API, then I would check out Substrate. Pappy might be able to do it, but it's not kind of totally ready for a beta release yet. So you might have to kind of keep up to date with any breaking changes, but Pappy would be a good bet as well. But yeah, Substrate I would recommend over TX wrapper for a custom chain. Don't know why it keeps going to new file when I switch windows. If there's no more questions on kind of useful libraries, connecting to wallets, and front-end basics, I can quickly run through this kind of common good that Talisman made earlier, maybe a couple of months ago, for the Substrate ecosystem. So it's called Sign In with Substrate. If you guys have been in Ethereum for a while, you might have heard of the equivalent called Sign In with Ethereum. It's basically the same concept, but for Substrate key pairs. It allows you to authenticate a Substrate account signature against a backend. So the user flow for a dApp that's using Sign In with Substrate is something along the lines of the users connect their wallet, they select an account to authenticate against the backend with, and then all the dApp needs to do is initiate a sign-in request and initiate a sign-in request to the user's wallet. The user then applies a signature to that message inside of the browser. The dApp then sends that signed message to a backend of its choosing. And then the backend will kind of verify the validity of that Substrate signature and issue a JSON web token for the user to authenticate themselves against some protected API that the backend is implementing. And this is like a really broad kind of common good for the ecosystem. And it's useful anywhere where you just want to combine aspects of what is on-chain and the user's account that they've signed a message with something that's off-chain. So if you're kind of doing a fundraising round and you haven't built out your kind of on-chain functionality yet, and you want to mock some of that using a centralized backend, Sign In with a Substrate is a useful tool for that. We first built it for sharing call data for different multi-sigs inside of Substrate. So we kind of store the call data in a backend, and only users that have proven they own their account with a signed message will be able to retrieve the call data from the protected API. And any application where you're kind of storing and fetching frivolous metadata that's related to your hackathon project that you think shouldn't be on chain, but should be kind of retrievable by the user, you might want to consider using Sign In with Substrate, where all you need to do is get the user to sign a message and then authenticate that against the backend and throw it any data that they are now kind of permissioned to see. It's kind of technology agnostic because all it is a standard for what is in the signed message. But we have made a TypeScript implementation and it's available on NPM at that address. Quickly on the kind of the technology agnostic message type that users are signing against. It's really simple. It's just the DNS authority that's requesting the signing, the address that has applied the signature, URI, nonce, and then some kind of a statement that can be anything that you want the user to see, as well as different chain names and chain IDs that you can kind of tag as like optional metadata if you're kind of targeting a particular network with the signed kind of message. I wanted to kind of walk through the demo dApp for this because we built this little demo for signing in with Substrate, but it will look something like this if you choose to implement sign in with Substrate in your hackathon project, where you kind of connect your wallet to the dApp like we did earlier, but then to sign in and sign a message to authenticate yourself against a backend that will then kind of populate some data. All you need to do is ask Talisman to sign some kind of a statement like this. This is welcome. And then you can see here that we are conforming to the sign in with Substrate standard inside of the actual data that's signed. And then I can sign that with my account. It then authenticates against the backend, proves the signature is valid. And then this is like a serverless function that's a bit of a demo, but it'll generate some random text if my account has produced a valid signature, which it did. If it didn't produce a valid signature, you'll see that you're not logged in and you failed to authenticate against the protected API. So this is something we built a couple of months ago. Very generic functionality for authenticating against the backend. I can imagine there are many different use cases for this because it really is anything that you want to put on a centralized backend. You can authenticate with this if the user has a Substrate account. And with that, happy to kind of replay anything we spoke about or answer a question that's related or unrelated to what was in the workshop. Yeah, thanks for having me. Encode and everyone.
Thank you so much. That was a really, really thorough workshop. To kick things off, I'm just going to scroll up because there was a question asked a little while ago, but do keep asking your questions, guys, in the tab and we'll get to them. So this question was, I've already played around to integrate Talisman into my front end. I use a custom Substrate node, which was easy to add into the extension. However, to see NFTs from the NFTs palette on my node, the extension forwards me to Talisman Web, where I don't see an option to add my local network. So my question is, how can I test whether NFTs are properly displayed in Talisman when using a local dev node?
So viewing NFTs isn't supported in the extension at the moment, which is why we direct you to the web app, where we do support a number of different NFT standards and collections inside of the collectibles tab. That doesn't kind of provide the user any ability to kind of augment what's in the collectibles tab with their own custom, either like NFT type or collection. But what you could do in like a testing environment is fork or kind of run the Talisman portal locally. The code is all open source, and you can kind of see how we are polling kind of for collectibles on different palettes. And you can add in your information locally if you want to test. If you want to see your NFT collection and chain in the Talisman portal kind of in production long term, you're more than welcome to submit a pull request that adds your kind of collection address, if it's like a 721 on an Ethereum network, or some kind of chain spec or a palette on a Substrate network. More than welcome to submit a PR if you want to see that supported. But yeah, no kind of custom options for the portal for now, I'm afraid.
Cool. Some questions again from R3, who says, I've used SIWS in the past in an Next.js 14 app with server functions. I really love what you guys did there. How can it be connected? Oh, sorry, I'm glitching a bit there. How can it be connected to other providers such as Talisman itself within the sign-in user story to create a user story that provides several options? Think Rainbow and ETH. Is there something similar in the Polkadot ecosystem, a wallet connect aggregator?
As in like a modal that surfaces the different kind of wallet connection options in a nice user interface? Is that the kind of aggregator you're talking about?
He says yes, or they say yes.
We built something called Talisman Connect like in 2021, like really, really early on, that was supposed to kind of do this job. But because the like library that we walked through earlier, the Polkadot extension dApp library, doesn't necessarily discriminate against which extension it wants to interact with when you're connecting to an extension from your dApp. It kind of led to this user experience where you would call Web3 enable, and if you had multiple extensions installed in your browser, multiple extensions would pop up with a kind of connection request. So we pretty quickly kind of canned that really lovely kind of modal that we made that kind of aggregates the different wallet options. But it should be still open source and kind of ready to, available for somebody to fork and improve if you want to use it. But yeah, there isn't anything like this in the Polkadot ecosystem because of the way that extension dApp library functions. We need like a EIP 6963 style kind of wallet metadata standard that they have in Ethereum for something like that to happen in the future.
Mario has a question. Can Talisman be used with kilt credentials, or does it have a solution for DIDs?
Talisman can use kilt chain. Any kind of transactions that are originated for kilt, Talisman can sign, and you can kind of store your accounts inside of the extension. We don't support the DIDs or Web3 names or kind of kilt credentials natively inside of the wallet, in the sense that we're rendering like the different DIDs or Web3 names that you have against your address. But totally, any accounts or transactions that you need to sign, Talisman will support those pretty easily. And we already support a few like DID providers inside of the extension, like ENS names are supported and A0 IDs are supported, but not the kilt for now. But that's just like a rendering kind of thing. If you need to sign transactions, it'll totally work.
Amazing. We've got Ian here following up his question. Where can I see that NFT standards that Talisman has implemented?
If you look in the, I can kind of find this package for you and we can post it in. But if you look in the Talisman web repository, there should be like a packages directory and then an NFT directory inside of that. And you can see the different adapters we have for the different palettes that are supported and the different NFT standards that are supported. If that's not easy to find, I can share my like Discord and Telegram handles in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, we've got a final question here, but do ask any more if any more arise. Mehrab asked, does Talisman support custom chains? If not, then what specification do I need to add to make my custom chain compatible with Talisman?
Talisman does support custom chains if you have, if your chain implements either the Substrate JSON RPC or the Ethereum JSON RPC, it's totally supported in Talisman as a custom chain. I hope it's easy to find in the UI, but I can quickly show you how to add it. If you go to settings, networks and tokens, you can kind of click on the manage networks option and you can add a network, either Polkadot or Ethereum here, and then select to add a network. And you can then kind of specify all the details for your custom chain here, what the URL is, and then it should populate different bits of metadata once you paste in the URL. But yeah, it should be supported as long as you implement the Substrate JSON RPC or the EVM JSON RPC. And if you want your custom chain supported in all of the Talisman devices that exist, you can submit a PR to the chain data repository. So if this is something that you think other folks will be interested in using, all of the chains that Talisman supports are defined in this repository here, and you feel free to submit a PR, and we can approve it if it looks like it's useful.
Very nice. Okay, well, our final question is R3 asking, how can I get a Talisman hoodie? So if that's an option, be sure to let him know.
I think the hoodies have been given away, so we need to do another like print run of the hoodies. But we usually have merch when we go to events. So the next event Talisman are at is SIWS here in Bangkok next March, like 13th, 14th. And it's probably not hoodies because Bangkok's bloody hot and you don't want a hoodie in Bangkok. But there should be Talisman merch if you attend SIWS or any other Polkadot conference that we're at.
Well, you heard it here first.
Actually,
okay, well,
I have a better answer to that. We sometimes do merch giveaways to a group of kind of Talisman community members called the Spirit Clan. If you have a Spirit Clan NFT, then you have access to this like permission section of our Discord server. And quite often we'll do kind of different competitions and giveaways with that group of users. They started off as our extension alpha testers, but now they're just like a group of supporters. So yeah, if you're not part of that group, head into the Talisman Discord and ask about acquiring one of those NFTs. And maybe there's like giveaways and things like that coming to that group. But yeah, otherwise find us in the event.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been a really, really great talk. Well, I guess we will wrap up because it looks like that's the end of the questions. I just wanted to encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to book a call with me. I would love to hear what you guys are planning to build and if this workshop has inspired you. I will pop my calendar link in the chat here, and Jonathan has kindly shared his Telegram and Discord. Before we say goodbye, do you have any words of advice or inspiration for people who are building for the hack?
Am I okay? I don't know. Build something cool and put it on production. When we were doing hackathons, our rule was always it has to be on mainnet. So you're not allowed to kind of do a hackathon submission that's on a testnet, mainnet. Yeah, I know. Yeah, build something that you think is interesting. That's not just like a fork of something that already exists.
Great. Thank you so much again. And I will say goodbye to you all now. So this was our final workshop, but do stay in touch. I'm always available on a call or on Discord. And in the meantime, have a lovely day, everybody.